I never expected to stand alone, staring at the ruins of a life I built with blood, sweat, and tears, only to have destiny offer a fortune I never sought. Clara Dalton pressed her palm against the cold glass of her Chicago apartment window, the city lights reflecting the turmoil she carried inside. Everything she had worked for, every sleepless night, every calculated risk, seemed to dissolve into thin air over the course of a few months. Her hospitality empire, once admired for elegance and precision, had crumbled, leaving her debts towering and her reputation teetering on the brink. The irony was cruel. After decades of careful planning, the single misfortune of trusting the wrong people had erased years of effort in a single stroke. Yet tonight, despite the exhaustion and the sting of betrayal, Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. A soft chime echoed from her phone, interrupting the quiet reverie, and she reached for it with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. It was a message from her daughter, Mia, her pride and the only constant anchor in a sea of chaos. Apartment viewing in Geneva tomorrow. I can't believe the scholarship. Call after to show the options. Clara's heart swelled with a fierce, protective pride. Her daughter had not only persevered through the family's collapse, but had been recognized for her talent on an international scale. The Global Innovator Scholarship at the International College of Design was no small achievement. It was validation proof that resilience could exist even in the shadow of loss. As she set the phone aside, her gaze fell on the small crystal pendant on her desk, a preserved vial of her golden blood, a symbol of the fortune that had unexpectedly entered her life. It was a reminder that even in despair, opportunity could emerge, and often in the most unlikely forms. Her thoughts wandered back to Victor Kane, the billionaire banker whose fortunes had intertwined with hers in ways she still struggled to fully comprehend. The man had survived his own near death, yet had insisted on offering her a chance to rebuild not just a business venture, but a path to reclaim purpose and influence. 3 weeks had passed since his surgery, and the memory of the hospital room lingered in her mind like a vivid scar. Victor's frailty, juxtaposed with his piercing intelligence and raw honesty, had left an indelible mark on Clara. He had confessed, with a vulnerability she had never expected from a man of his stature, that what he regretted most in his darkest moment was not seeing what she would do next. Those words haunted her, resonated with her, and challenged her to consider a future that had seemed impossible mere months ago. It was more than a business proposition. It was a test of character, a recognition of shared resilience born from the intersection of vulnerability and opportunity. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Precise and deliberate, she opened it to find Marcus, her ex-husband, standing with that same practiced charm that had once made her heart falter. His presence was polished, measured, as if every step, every gesture, had been meticulously calculated to elicit a specific response. "Your new place is lovely," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Though I see the security downstairs is quite persistent. That's the point of security," Clara replied coolly, deliberately keeping him at the threshold. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the simmering emotion she still carried from past betrayals. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not accustomed to being denied immediate access. "I thought we should talk," he began, choosing his words as carefully as always, to resolve matters amicably before the attorneys escalate things unnecessarily. Clara studied him, measuring the sincerity in his tone against the years of disappointment and abandonment she still felt. "Our attorneys are doing their jobs," she replied, "protecting our respective interests. I have no interest in arbitrary concessions." Marcus's smile tightened, faltering slightly under her gaze. "Surely after 25 years of marriage, we can discuss this reasonably," he said, attempting a familiar charm, but the edge in her voice cut through it. "Reasonable," Clara thought, recalling nights of financial collapse, desperate phone calls, and the moment her daughter had been forced to leave college. "You walked away when everything fell apart," she said quietly, her voice steady but sharp. "And now you return when circumstances have shifted." He nodded slowly, admitting with practiced contrition, "I panicked. I did not handle things well. But now, when I have resources again," she said, emphasizing the shift in power. "You have a change of heart." Convenient timing. Marcus's expression hardened, a flicker of frustration passing through his polished exterior. "That's unfair." "Clara, I've had months to reflect," he said, a faint defensiveness creeping in. Coincidentally aligning with news of your golden blood and your new partnership, Clara leaned against the doorframe, allowing the weight of her composure to speak louder than words. "Did you know Mia received a prestigious scholarship in Geneva?" "No thanks to you." Marcus hesitated, a flash of surprise crossing his features. "I heard," he admitted, careful to preserve pride in the admission. Clara's resolve softened slightly. Whatever faults he had as a husband, he had been a father when present. "Yes, she has," she said, letting a fraction of warmth seep in. Marcus seized the opening. "Could we sit? I have a proposal that might resolve our situation amicably." Against instinct, Clara allowed him in, observing quietly as he appraised the modest apartment with a careful eye. "I see you've started fresh," he said, nodding at the minimal furnishings. "In more ways than one." Clara gestured toward the couch, remaining standing herself, her posture deliberate. "What's your proposal?" she asked, curiosity tinged with caution. He crossed his legs casually, as if the conversation were trivial. "I am prepared to drop all claims to your compensation from the banking arrangement," he began, "in exchange for a one-time settlement. A clean break. No further legal entanglements." Clara's mind weighed the offer against months of calculated struggle, betrayal, and newfound strength. "Interesting," she said finally, voice calm. "And how much would this clean break cost me?" Marcus named a figure substantial, yet far less than his attorneys had initially demanded. Clara considered it briefly, but something deep within her had fundamentally shifted. "No," she said simply, resolute. "Your claim has no legal merit. You abandoned me when I had nothing. You don't get to return now that I have something." The calm finality of her words seemed to shake him, exposing the calculation beneath the charm. "Alexander Kane," she thought, "may have dazzled me with wealth, but Marcus is now revealed for what he truly is, an opportunist confronting a woman who has rediscovered her own power." Her phone chimed again, and this time it was Victor, his voice clear and warm. "Bridging oceans, is this a bad time?" he asked, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Actually, it's perfect," Clara replied, settling into the chair near her desk. Marcus just left. Victor's laughter, soft and genuine, carried across the line. "I wish I could have witnessed it. You are formidable when properly motivated." Clara smiled faintly, the recognition of her own resilience settling in. Weeks of deliberation, legal entanglements, and emotional recalibration had led her to this moment, a crossroads where past betrayals met future possibilities. She reached for her pendant, the vial of golden blood glowing softly in the lamplight, a tangible reminder that the extraordinary often emerged from the ordinary, and that even from ruin, new paths could be forged. She opened a blank notebook, writing at the top of the first page, "Eventuality beyond crisis management." Beneath it, Chapter 1. The value within. This story would not be about money, betrayal, or opportunity alone. It would be about discovering true worth, resilience, and the courage to rise again. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered, indifferent yet spectacular, reflecting the life Clara had yet to shape on her own terms. Golden blood, yes, but also clarity, courage, and a new beginning. This was just a beginning. The morning sunlight spilled across Clara Dalton's modest Chicago apartment, illuminating the sparse furniture and empty walls that symbolized her fresh start. She moved to the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, and let the steam rise, inhaling it like a ritual of renewal. Each sip reminded her of how far she had come in the past 6 months. From despair to cautious optimism, her phone vibrated with a new message. It was from Victor Kane's assistant, confirming the schedule for the upcoming week in Zurich. Clara hesitated, letting the anticipation mix with a subtle unease she couldn't yet name. She had agreed to meet Victor not just to finalize the business partnership but also to explore the complex, unspoken connection that had developed between them. Her mind wandered back to the hospital room, to Victor's confession about his regrets, and to the unguarded vulnerability he had shown in those rare moments of truth. It was unusual for a man of such wealth and power to admit fear, mortality, and dependence on someone outside his own bloodline. Yet that honesty had ignited something in Clara, a cautious curiosity, a flicker of trust that she hadn't allowed herself in years. Mia's message arrived just as she was lost in thought. Finalizing Geneva apartment. Can't wait to show you tomorrow. Love you. Clara smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Her daughter's determination mirrored her own, and for the first time in months, she felt a shared sense of hope. After breakfast, she reviewed the documents Victor had sent for the Eventuality Consulting venture. It wasn't a simple subsidiary or a passive investment. It was a fully autonomous venture that required her expertise, judgment, and vision. Her role would involve developing strategies for clients facing catastrophic setbacks, financial, operational, and reputational. The documents detailed initial funding, access to Tor Banking Group's client network, and the freedom to design the methodology as she saw fit. Yet, autonomy came with responsibility, and the weight of decision-making pressed heavily on her. Could she rebuild without repeating past mistakes? Could she navigate the complexities of high-stakes finance while maintaining her ethical compass? Her reflection was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was her assistant, Emily, carrying a stack of folders containing updated market research and potential client leads. We've been compiling profiles of companies that could benefit from your expertise, Emily said. Placing the folders on the table, Clara nodded, appreciating the support, yet aware that no one could walk this path for her, alone with the documents. She began analyzing potential strategies, her mind alive with possibilities and risks. Each client profile represented a story of struggle, loss, and the desperate search for stability, the same challenges she had faced not long ago. She thought of Marcus, and the confrontation from the previous evening. Though he had returned with a proposal for a clean break, his presence reminded her of how fragile trust could be, and how carefully one must navigate personal and financial entanglements. Clara realized that rebuilding her life required both vigilance and courage, a duality she had learned the hard way. Her focus shifted to Victor's proposal, and she began drafting a plan that would preserve her independence while leveraging the financial support of Tor Banking Group. Instead of forming a subsidiary, she decided Eventuality Consulting would remain her own company, with Tor as a minority investor and strategic partner. This arrangement would allow her to maintain control over client relationships, methodologies, and operational decisions. It was a delicate balance, a dance between collaboration and autonomy, but one that felt aligned with her values and experience. Hours passed as she mapped out operational frameworks, marketing approaches, and potential case studies for early clients. She paused only to glance at the crystal vial on her desk, the preserved golden blood, a reminder that her value was not defined solely by money or circumstance. By mid-afternoon, her thoughts turned to Victor and the personal dimension of their arrangement. She had agreed to spend 6 months in Chicago, ostensibly to assist with the business launch, but also to explore the connection that had grown between them amidst extraordinary circumstances. It was uncharted territory, a blend of professional partnership and intimate vulnerability, and the uncertainty both frightened and exhilarated her. Her reflection was interrupted again by the sound of her phone ringing. It was Victor himself, and his voice carried warmth and familiarity, a stark contrast to the formalities of their previous interactions. "Good afternoon, Clara. How are preparations going?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Intense, but productive," she replied, smiling despite the distance between them. Victor chuckled softly. "I've been reviewing your progress. You're moving faster than I expected. Efficient and thorough as always." Clara felt a small thrill of pride, tempered by the weight of responsibility. "Thank you." I'm trying to ensure eventuality launches on a strong footing, while maintaining the independence we discussed. That's exactly why I wanted you on this project, Victor said, his voice turning serious. Your instincts, your experience with setbacks, and your resilience, these are invaluable. She swallowed, feeling the gravity of his words. This venture was more than just a business. It was a test of character. A chance to prove to herself that she could rise from past failures. We've also scheduled meetings with early clients next week in Zurich, Victor continued. Half days for you, of course, but I wanted you aware of the timeline. Clara nodded, making mental notes. I'll be prepared. I want to ensure the methodology is sound and the client experience is exceptional. Victor's laugh returned, lighter this time. Of course, and I expect nothing less. But remember, Clara, this is also about you, about what comes next. She paused, the weight of his words settling in. What comes next? It wasn't just about business, or rebuilding her life, or even her relationship with Victor. It was about reclaiming agency, about shaping a future on her own terms. The call ended, leaving her in silence. Yet the clarity remained, even as she thought of Marcus and the attempts to claim what she had rightfully earned. Clara realized she was no longer the person who had depended on others for validation or survival. She was her own architect, and eventuality consulting was her blueprint for resilience, influence, and redemption. As dusk fell over Lake Michigan, Clara returned to her window. Watching the city lights shimmer against the water in the distance, she imagined herself in Zurich, navigating client meetings, operational strategies, and perhaps the delicate dance with Victor. Each step a testament to her strength and vision. The apartment remained quiet, the glow of the city and the crystal vial casting long shadows across the desk where she had drafted her plans. For the first time in months, she felt a rare combination of anticipation and calm, knowing that the coming months would test her intellect, courage, and heart. Her thoughts drifted to Mia, and a wave of gratitude surged through her. Her daughter's success was a reminder that resilience could be inherited, nurtured, and celebrated. Clara picked up her notebook, adding notes to her chapter: independence, strategy, and trust. Each word reflected a lesson learned from past hardships and a promise to approach the future with deliberate intention. By nightfall, she had mapped out client acquisition strategies, contingency planning frameworks, and initial marketing approaches. The hours melted away, yet Clara felt no fatigue, only a growing sense of purpose. In the quiet of her apartment, with the city alive below and her thoughts aligned above, she realized that the journey ahead was not just about recovering what was lost. It was about discovering new dimensions of herself, exploring uncharted territories of business, trust, and resilience, and forging relationships that could withstand both fortune and adversity. As she turned off the lamp and prepared for rest, Clara whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning. Whatever comes next, I will meet it on my terms. Golden blood, yes, but also clarity, courage, and a vision that no setback could destroy." The night settled over the city, a blanket of possibility and challenge. As Clara Dalton stood poised at the crossroads of trust and opportunity, the morning air in Chicago was crisp, carrying with it a sense of new beginnings and the faint tang of Lake Michigan. Clara Dalton sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon as thoughts of the impending trip to Zurich swirled in her mind. This journey was not just a business venture. It was a test of resilience, a foray into uncharted personal and professional territory. She had spent the night reviewing contracts, client profiles, and contingency frameworks, ensuring that eventuality consulting would start on a foundation as strong as her convictions. A soft chime from her phone signaled a new message, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Victor Kane's name flash on the screen. "Good morning, Clara. I've just received word that our Zurich offices are ready for your review. Shall we confirm your arrival time?" She typed back carefully, her fingers pausing over the keys. "Yes, Victor. I'll arrive Wednesday morning. Let's coordinate schedules for client introductions and operational briefings." His reply was swift, almost instantaneous, carrying that familiar undertone of warmth mixed with authority. "Perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing your approach firsthand. It's been too long since we collaborated closely. Clara leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Even a simple exchange with Victor stirred a mix of anticipation and apprehension she could not yet name. She thought of the hospital room, the way he had looked at her with a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and that unspoken recognition of shared experience. It was a bond forged not through convenience or biology but through the raw, unvarnished reality of crisis and survival, yet the specter of the past remained. Gavin's visit yesterday had reminded her of how fragile trust could be, and how quickly old wounds could reopen. His attempt to claim a portion of her newfound resources had been both audacious and petty, yet it also revealed the man he truly was beneath the practiced charm. Clara shook her head, dispelling the lingering tension, and turned her attention to practical matters. She needed to finalize her portfolio for eventuality consulting, ensuring that clients could clearly see the value of her methodology and the depth of her expertise. Each case study, each framework she drafted, carried a piece of her own story, her experience navigating collapse, rebuilding trust, and restoring stability against overwhelming odds. Hours passed in meticulous work, punctuated only by brief pauses to gaze out at the lake, the water reflecting her own thoughts like a mirror of possibility. By afternoon, she heard a knock at the door. It was Emily, holding an envelope with the Tor Banking Group's logo. They've sent over preliminary financial arrangements and proposed client lists, Emily said, placing the envelope on the desk. Clara opened it carefully, scanning each page with a critical eye. The figures were substantial, more than enough to support the launch of Eventuality Consulting independently, yet structured in a way that encouraged strategic partnership rather than control. She noted the inclusion of risk mitigation frameworks, client relationship protocols, and initial marketing guidelines, all designed to accelerate the growth of her new venture. Clara realized this arrangement represented more than financial support. It was a vote of confidence from Victor and Tor, an acknowledgement of her unique perspective and capability, yet she could not ignore the personal dimension. The unspoken bond that had begun to form with Victor. It was complicated, delicate, and fraught with potential pitfalls, but it was also undeniable. Her thoughts drifted to their conversations, the way he had spoken about regret, mortality, and the potential he saw in her to help others rebuild from devastation. It was more than professional admiration. It was recognition of character, resilience, and vision. As the afternoon faded into evening, Clara's phone rang again, this time with an unfamiliar number. Hello? She answered, cautious. Clara, it's Marcus, the voice said, calm but with a subtle edge. Her stomach tightened. Marcus, I wasn't expecting. I know. I came to clarify one thing before you leave for Zurich, he interrupted, his tone carrying a hint of urgency. Clara remained silent, listening, her pulse steady despite the memory of past betrayal. I want to make this clear, he continued. I'm withdrawing all claims to your assets. No further legal action, no interference with Eventuality Consulting. Consider it a clean slate. She blinked, processing the words, and felt a mixture of relief and lingering skepticism. Why now? She asked, her voice calm but measured. Because I realize there's nothing to gain and everything to lose by prolonging this. And because you've demonstrated resilience I underestimated, he admitted. Clara studied him through the phone, recognizing a rare honesty beneath the habitual calculation. Very well, she replied, keeping her tone steady. Ensure your attorneys are aware. This conversation concludes our matter. He paused, then added, I hope you find success with your venture, Clara. Truly. After hanging up, Clara allowed herself a small exhale of relief. The past was finally receding, giving space for the future she was about to build. Her focus returned to Victor, and to the trip that would soon take her across the Atlantic. She reviewed client presentations, operational strategies, and contingency plans late into the night, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional hum of the city below, a backdrop that contrasted with the storm of planning and anticipation inside her mind. Clara paused, glancing at the crystal vial of her preserved golden blood. a symbol of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her here. It reminded her that value often lay hidden, revealed only under duress, and that her life had been irrevocably changed by forces beyond her control. Yet she also realized that control, clarity, and resilience could be cultivated, nurtured, and wielded with intention. As she prepared for bed, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The journey ahead would test her intellect, courage, and heart. Yet it also offered the first genuine sense of agency she had felt in years. Victor's partnership was more than business, it was an opportunity to co-create, to explore the unspoken bond between them, and to define a new chapter on her own terms. Clara Dalton closed her eyes, feeling the tension of the past 6 months ease slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism. Whatever challenges awaited in Zurich, she was ready to meet them with clarity, strategy, and resilience. Golden blood, yes, but also the strength to define her own destiny. The night settled over Chicago, a silent witness to her determination, as Clara Dalton prepared to step into a future forged from trials, trust, and the unyielding pursuit of possibility. Tomorrow, she would board a plane, cross continents, and begin a chapter that promised not only professional triumph but also the potential for deeply personal transformation. And somewhere in the distance, the city lights reflected her resolve, twinkling like the first sparks of a life rebuilt from the ashes. The early morning fog over O'Hare Airport carried the familiar scent of jet fuel and anticipation. Clara Dalton tightened her scarf, gripping the handle of her rolling suitcase as she joined the queue for security. Her mind buzzed with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, every step toward the gate echoing the weight of her decision to venture into Zurich. This trip was more than business, it was an uncharted journey into the intertwining of professional ambition and personal entanglement. Her phone vibrated with a message from Victor Kane. Safe travels, Clara. Flight details confirmed. Airport pickup in Zurich arranged. A small smile tugged at her lips. His meticulousness was as comforting as it was daunting. As she boarded the plane, Clara reflected on the events of the past months. From the collapse of her company to the discovery of her golden blood, the whirlwind of betrayal, opportunity, and rediscovery had left her both exhausted and invigorated. She found her seat by the window, the city shrinking beneath her as the plane ascended, the familiar skyline of Chicago fading into a quilt of clouds. Her thoughts drifted to the hospital, to Victor's words, and to the extraordinary proposition of eventuality consulting. He had seen something in her that she herself had only recently begun to recognize: a capacity for rebuilding, for strategizing under pressure, for finding clarity amid chaos. Yet even as she considered the business venture, her mind lingered on the unspoken tension that existed between them, a magnetic pull neither of them had fully acknowledged. Hours passed in quiet reflection, punctuated by the hum of the aircraft and the occasional murmur of fellow passengers. Clara reviewed her notes for the Zurich meetings, refining presentations, rehearsing client pitches, and ensuring that every contingency was accounted for. As the plane began its descent over Zurich, the city unfolded beneath her like a mosaic of history and modernity. Snow-capped mountains framed the horizon, their stark beauty a reminder that challenges could be breathtaking as well as daunting. At the airport, a black sedan awaited, Victor's driver already holding a placard with her name. Clara approached, suitcase in hand, and was greeted by Victor himself, stepping out with that precise blend of warmth and authority that had become familiar to her. "Welcome to Zurich, Clara," he said, extending his hand in greeting, though the slight curve of his smile suggested more than mere formality. "Thank you, Victor. I'm eager to see the offices and meet the team," she replied, keeping her voice professional despite the flutter in her chest. The ride towards Zurich headquarters was quiet, the city streets glinting with early morning frost, the silence between them carrying an unspoken weight. Victor finally broke it. "I trust your flight was comfortable?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes, sufficiently. It gave me time to prepare," Clara said, choosing her words carefully. Victor's eyes flicked toward her, sharp, assessing, and then softened slightly. Clara, I realize this venture is not merely professional. You carry with you experience few could understand. She nodded, her fingers tightening around her bag strap. It's more than business. It's about making sure failure doesn't define anyone. He gave a small, approving nod. And yet, even those who survive carry scars. We build not only on opportunity but on resilience and lessons learned. The car pulled up to the towering glass facade of Tor Banking Group's Zurich office. The reflection of the morning sun dazzling against the windows. Inside, the reception area was sleek, modern, and meticulously organized. A physical manifestation of the precision Victor championed. Your office is ready, Clara, Victor said, gesturing to the elevators. I've arranged for a brief tour before we meet the operations team. She followed him silently, absorbing the surroundings, the hum of activity, the understated authority that seemed to permeate every corner of the building. As they walked, Clara felt a mixture of awe and intimidation. Tor was a world of power, precision, and unyielding expectation. Victor's presence beside her, however, lent a sense of reassurance, a tether to someone who understood the stakes and the pressures of navigating such a landscape. They reached the executive suite, where a small contingent of Tor associates awaited, portfolios in hand, prepared to outline operational procedures, client profiles, and initial strategies. Clara scanned the room, her gaze steady, taking note of every detail, every subtle signal of hierarchy and influence. Victor introduced her, emphasizing the unique value of her experience, the insights born of personal and professional upheaval. The associates responded with respect, though curiosity lingered in their eyes. A silent acknowledgement that Clara's presence disrupted the usual flow of corporate predictability. Hours passed in detailed discussions, case studies dissected, and strategic frameworks debated. Clara's expertise, honed through hardship and reinvention, became evident. Her proposals challenging traditional assumptions while grounded in pragmatism. Victor watched her quietly, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips as he observed her navigate complex scenarios with precision and intuition. As the meeting concluded, Victor led her to a private terrace overlooking the city, the crisp mountain air mingling with the faint aroma of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe. Remarkable, he said softly, not to anyone but to her, and the word carried a weight that resonated far beyond simple praise. Clara felt a flicker of something unspoken, a recognition of shared understanding, a bond forged in trials and mutual respect. Before she could respond, her phone chimed with a message from her daughter. Mia, Clara, the apartment in Geneva looks perfect. Can't wait to show you photos. A wave of warmth washed over her. Despite the whirlwind of business, of travel, of navigating powerful figures and complex dynamics, she was reminded of the personal life she was rebuilding alongside her professional ambitions. Victor, noticing the softening expression on her face, commented lightly, "Family keeps us grounded, even amid the highest hours of finance." Clara smiled, a brief but genuine expression. Indeed, it's the anchor that keeps the chaos from consuming us entirely. The afternoon faded into early evening, and they returned to the offices for final preparations, reviewing schedules, meeting agendas, and client introductions. Clara could feel the tension building, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension as she stood on the threshold of a venture that could define the next chapter of her life. Victor spoke quietly, almost personally. "Clara, remember that in every challenge, there is clarity. Trust yourself, as much as I trust your judgment." She nodded, a quiet affirmation of the resolve that had brought her here.
The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the city, and Clara Dalton felt, for the first time in months, the delicate balance between control and surrender, between strategy and intuition, and between the professional and personal world she was about to merge. As the lights of Zurich twinkled below, she understood that the coming days would test her intellect, her courage, and her heart in equal measure. And yet, for the first time since everything had collapsed, she felt ready to rise, to meet every challenge, and to embrace whatever consequences, opportunities, and connections awaited her. Golden blood, resilience, strategy, and heart, The tools she carried into this city were formidable. The night settled over Zurich, quiet but alive, and Clara Dalton stood poised at the precipice of transformation, ready to navigate a world as complex, unpredictable, and rewarding as she had ever imagined. The next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Reuter's Zurich headquarters, casting long golden streaks across the polished conference room. Clara Dalton sat at the head of the table, her notebook open, pen poised, heart racing with anticipation. Today marked her first full presentation to the senior partners and potential clients of Eventuality Consulting, a venture born from her resilience, her blood, and her instinctive brilliance. Victor Kane stood at her side, his tailored suit crisp, expression unreadable, yet the faint curve of his lips hinted at quiet confidence. "Clara," he said softly, leaning toward her before the meeting began, "remember, they will test your assumptions as much as your methodology. Be prepared, but trust yourself." She exhaled, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished oak surface. "I am prepared. Let's begin." The room filled with a dozen executives, all impeccably dressed, eyes sharp and evaluating, each carrying a carefully curated dossier. Clara introduced herself, outlining her journey briefly, emphasizing the value of experience forged in adversity, of lessons learned from collapse and reinvention. A subtle murmur ran through the room, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, as they digested the concept of Eventuality Consulting, an approach blending crisis management with anticipatory strategy and human resilience. She outlined case studies, carefully anonymized but rich with insight, demonstrating how her methodology had salvaged failing ventures, restored operations after reputational crises, and guided individuals through catastrophic financial loss. Questions came quickly, incisively, testing her assumptions, probing the feasibility, challenging the framework she had spent weeks refining. Clara met each inquiry with calm authority, deflecting personal pride, focusing on empirical data, and illustrating adaptability without losing strategic vision. A senior partner, a woman named Ingrid Schaefer, leaned forward, her steely gaze assessing Clara's every word. "Your experience is impressive, Ms. Dalton," she said, "but Zurich operates differently. How will your methodology adapt to our clientele, who expect absolute precision and minimal risk?" Clara smiled slightly, meeting her eyes. "That is precisely why we integrate scenario modeling with client-specific analysis. Every recommendation is grounded in data, risk assessment, and human behavioral insight. The methodology is flexible but disciplined." A pause fell over the room as the executives exchanged glances, the challenge momentarily suspended by the clarity of her response. Victor's presence beside her remained steady, a silent reinforcement that bolstered her confidence. Clara continued, walking them through a simulated crisis scenario, a company faced with sudden regulatory scrutiny, reputational damage, and internal dissent. She explained step by step how Eventuality Consulting would deploy rapid assessment teams, implement strategic communication, stabilize operational risks, and guide leadership decisions. As she spoke, she noticed subtle signs of approval, nods, pen scribbling, eyes narrowing not in doubt but concentration. A younger executive, Daniel Meyer, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And what of human factors? Many strategies fail not due to financial mismanagement but emotional breakdowns at leadership level. How do you address that?" Clara met his challenge head-on. "Exactly. Leadership resilience and emotional acuity are integral. Our methodology incorporates psychological support, decision coaching, and anticipatory guidance to ensure that human variables enhance, rather than derail, operational success." Murmurs of agreement swept around the table, signaling the subtle shift from skepticism to cautious respect. Victor's voice finally joined hers, low and supportive. "Clara's approach has already been tested under extreme conditions. Her results speak for themselves." The executives listened, some with visible surprise, as Clara navigated detailed projections and nuanced risk matrices, illustrating both the analytical rigor and human insight underpinning the venture. Questions shifted from challenges to clarifications, each answered with precision, demonstrating her command over both the material and the room's dynamic. At one point, Ingrid Schaefer leaned back, arms crossed, eyes still evaluating. "Impressive," she said finally. "Your methodology is robust. But you must understand that Zurich's clientele are notoriously conservative. They will expect immediate proof of results. Clara nodded, unwavering. And that is why our first clients will be carefully selected, high-impact cases where measurable results can be demonstrated without unnecessary risk. Transparency, accountability, and controlled outcomes are our guiding principles. Victor gave a subtle nod, his approval unspoken but palpable, and Clara felt a surge of validation. By the time the meeting concluded, the room's energy had shifted from cautious doubt to tentative optimism. The executives departed, leaving Clara and Victor alone, the silence between them charged with relief and quiet triumph. Victor extended his hand, but then hesitated, his expression unreadable. "You handled that brilliantly," he said finally. "Few could maintain composure under that level of scrutiny." Clara allowed herself a small smile, closing her notebook. "It was necessary. The stakes are high, but so are the opportunities." Victor studied her for a moment, then added softly, "And personally, Clara, you were extraordinary. Not just for the methodology, but for the presence you carry." Her chest tightened slightly. Compliments from him carried weight she could not easily dismiss, yet she maintained a professional posture. "I appreciate that, Victor. But results matter more than words." He nodded, though the faint trace of a smile lingered. "Always. And results are coming." The afternoon unfolded with back-to-back consultations, each meeting an opportunity to refine their approach, build rapport, and anticipate potential challenges. Clara was exhausted by early evening, but her mind buzzed with the exhilaration of success, the satisfaction of proving her worth in a room filled with skepticism. Victor guided her to a small cafe overlooking the Limmat River, the early twilight shimmering on the water's surface. "Take a moment," he said gently. "You earned it." Clara sipped her coffee, allowing herself a rare moment of reflection. The journey that had brought her here, from financial ruin to golden opportunity, felt surreal. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "Mom, Geneva apartment secured. Can't wait to show you photos when I arrive." A swell of pride and love coursed through her. Her daughter was thriving, independent, and courageous, the very qualities Clara had worked so hard to instill. Victor's gaze softened as he observed her reaction. "You've built more than a company, Clara. You've built a foundation that survives crises, a model for resilience." Clara's mind drifted momentarily to the future. Alexander Richter's proposal, the eventuality consulting venture, her daughter's scholarship, and the delicate interplay of trust and risk, all intertwined, forming a tapestry both exhilarating and terrifying. Victor's voice pulled her back. "Tomorrow, we finalize client selections and begin pilot engagements. Are you ready for that?" Clara nodded firmly, a renewed sense of determination settling over her. "I am. Let's make this venture succeed, for our clients and for ourselves." The night fell over Zurich, the city lights glimmering like stars reflected in the river. Clara Dalton understood that this was only the beginning, not just of a business, but of a life rebuilt with resilience, clarity, and courage. As she returned to her hotel room, she paused at the window, gazing at the snow-dusted streets below. The world was vast, uncertain, and demanding, yet she had never felt more prepared to meet it. Tomorrow would test her further, challenge her instincts, and perhaps even touch the personal boundaries she had yet to navigate. But for tonight, she allowed herself a rare smile, a private acknowledgement of how far she had come, and the extraordinary possibilities still waiting beyond the horizon. The plane touched down in Geneva as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, casting long reflections over the snow-dusted tarmac. Clara Dalton stepped into the crisp evening air, her suitcase rolling smoothly behind her, a mixture of anticipation and unease coiling in her stomach. Alexander Richter was waiting, tall, composed, though the faint lines on his face betrayed the exhaustion of recent recovery. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying that familiar blend of authority and subtle warmth. Clara allowed herself a small smile, returning the greeting. "It's good to be here. The city feels different than I expected, quieter in some ways." "Geneva has a rhythm all its own," he replied, his eyes scanning the streets briefly before meeting hers. "I hope you don't mind the modest arrangements. Your suite is comfortable, though not opulent." Comfortable was exactly what she needed, a temporary refuge from the whirlwind of her life back in Chicago. The car ride to his residence passed in a tense quiet, punctuated only by the occasional instructions regarding tomorrow's meetings and client visits. Clara's mind drifted to the weeks following the Zurich launch, the careful calibration of eventuality consulting, and the delicate dance of trust and authority she had navigated with Victor. Alexander's sudden entrance into her professional and personal world still made her pulse quicken, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and the faintest trace of fear. By the time they arrived at his residence, a sleek yet understated penthouse overlooking Lake Geneva, the sky had darkened, lights reflecting across the water like scattered diamonds. "Dinner will be ready shortly," Alexander said, leading her through the minimalist space with precision. "I hope you're hungry." "It's simple, but prepared with care." Clara allowed herself a quiet laugh. "Simple is exactly what I need tonight. No grand gestures, no pressure." They dined in relative silence at first, each mindful of the unspoken tension, the mutual recognition that much lay unsaid between them. Finally, Alexander cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. "Clara, about last week, in Zurich. You handled yourself admirably. Not just the presentation, but the presence you carry. That was impressive." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Thank you. But you don't need to tell me that. I know what I'm capable of, and I know the stakes." He studied her expression, his eyes softening slightly. "Stakes are higher than either of us anticipated. Your methodology, your instincts, your resilience, they are all critical. But the personal implications, they are more complicated." She placed her fork down, exhaling slowly. "I know. This isn't just business anymore, is it?" "No," he admitted quietly, "it's never just business when lives, legacies, and trust intersect in ways that defy conventional logic." Clara's mind raced, weighing the implications of his words. The collaboration with RTOR was a professional coup, but the intertwining of her life with Alexander's, his health, his family, his power, added layers she could not ignore. "I came here to focus on eventuality consulting," she said firmly. "To establish a foundation that is independent, resilient, and sustainable. That remains my priority." Alexander nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And it should be. I am not here to overshadow that, Clara. But, truthfully, I find myself invested in more than just the venture." The weight of his admission pressed on her chest, an undeniable pull she had tried to rationalize, compartmentalize, and contain. "I've been careful," she said softly. "Careful not to get swept away, not to let personal entanglements cloud judgment. You understand that, don't you?" "I do," he replied, his voice low, sincere. "More than you might imagine. But it's difficult to maintain distance when our lives are entwined by circumstance, risk, and unspoken history." Clara's thoughts flickered back to Chicago, the months of rebuilding, the quiet triumphs, the challenges of reclaiming autonomy while navigating the shadows of past relationships and betrayals. She had grown stronger, yet this proximity to Alexander Richter tested the very core of her resolve. "Tomorrow," he continued, "we begin meetings with prospective clients for eventuality. I've arranged for half-day sessions, allowing us to observe dynamics, assess engagement, and adjust methodology in real time." She nodded, absorbing the strategic overview while silently bracing for the personal dimension she knew awaited. After dinner, they retreated to the sitting room, the space filled with understated elegance and the faint scent of cedar. Alexander poured 2 glasses of wine, offering one to Clara, who accepted it with measured grace. "Clara," he began, his voice softer, more intimate, "there is something I must admit. During my hospitalization, when I faced uncertainty and potential loss, I realized how much I value your presence, your intellect, your ability to see the unseen, and to act decisively where others hesitate." Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. "Alexander, those were difficult days. We survived them. But survival does not always equate to clarity." He met her gaze unwaveringly. "It does when clarity is born from truth. I was frightened, not of death alone, but of leaving unfulfilled opportunities, both professional and personal. You were instrumental, Clara. Not just to my recovery, but to my sense of what is possible. Clara's chest ached with a strange combination of pride, fear, and longing. The honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability in his tone, struck a chord she had not expected. She began, then paused, searching for the words that balanced honesty with prudence. I don't fully understand what this is between us, Alexander. But I do know that it complicates every decision I make, professionally and personally. He nodded, acknowledging her restraint. I understand. And I do not ask for recklessness or impulsivity. Only awareness. Only that you recognize what is unfolding, and consider it without judgment. The night deepened around them, a quiet cocoon where the past and future intersected, where possibilities shimmered in the faint lamplight and the soft reflection of the lake beyond. Clara set her glass down, voice steady despite the tumult within. Then let us focus on the venture first. Let us prove its value, establish its foundation. After that, we may explore, whatever this is between us. But not before. Alexander's expression softened, a subtle relief flickering across his features. Agreed. The venture comes first. But I will not hide my recognition of the other possibilities either. The night wore on with careful conversation, strategic discussions interspersed with glimpses of personal reflection, the dance between professional rigor and human vulnerability. Clara retired to her suite later, standing by the window, gazing at the glittering lights reflected across Lake Geneva. Her mind replayed the conversations, the stakes, and the unspoken bonds forming between her and Alexander. She allowed herself one deep breath, grounding in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and perhaps new revelations about trust, resilience, and the interplay of hearts and ambition. For the first time in months, Clara Dalton felt fully alive, not just surviving, but poised to seize opportunity, navigate complexity, and confront the shadows of the past with courage and clarity. And beneath it all, a quiet hope stirred, fragile yet undeniable, that this extraordinary journey might yield not only professional triumph but something profoundly personal and transformative as well. The morning light spilled over Lake Geneva, painting the water in soft golds and muted blues as Clara prepared for her first full day with Alexander in Geneva. She dressed deliberately, opting for tailored simplicity over flamboyant style. Aware that first impressions in this environment mattered as much as substance, Alexander greeted her at the residence, a faint smile playing across his lips. You're punctual, he observed, though the tone carried more warmth than critique. I find that structure keeps chaos at bay, Clara replied, sliding her laptop into her leather briefcase. And today will be anything but predictable. He chuckled softly, the sound low and unexpected, revealing a rare glimpse of ease beneath his otherwise controlled demeanor. True, he said, glancing at the morning streets, already alive with business and tourism. We'll start with the client visit. I've arranged for RTOR to introduce Eventuality Consulting to a high-profile family office, LeClaire Investments. Clara nodded, reviewing in her mind the methodology she had painstakingly refined over weeks of study and simulations. The ride in Alexander's sleek black sedan was quiet at first, filled only with the faint hum of tires on pavement. You've been deliberate in preparing Eventuality, Alexander said after a pause, but I must ask, how confident are you in managing their expectations? LeClaire will challenge you. Clara's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. I welcome the challenge. Confidence comes from preparation, not hope. I've studied their portfolio, their history, and their failures. We address weaknesses with clarity and precision. He nodded approvingly. Good. Precision is key. But also understand, they will probe for character, judgment, and resilience. Not just methodology. She absorbed the warning, committing it to memory. This was more than a presentation, it was a trial of trust, insight, and authority. Upon arrival at the LeClaire office, the scale of their operations was immediately apparent: sprawling offices, understated opulence, and an air of calculated control. Clara was introduced to the principal partners, a father and son team whose subtle scrutiny could pierce pretenses. Ms. Dalton, the elder LeClaire said, extending a hand, Alexander has spoken highly of your capabilities. Let's see if reality aligns with expectation. Clara accepted the handshake firmly, aware of the delicate balance between confidence and humility. As the meeting progressed, she guided the conversation, presenting her methodology for eventuality consulting with clarity, precision, and evidence-based rationale. She illustrated potential risk scenarios, strategic recovery paths, and long-term sustainability plans, weaving in examples that highlighted her lived experience alongside professional expertise. Alexander observed silently, a steady presence at her side, only occasionally offering input when subtle technical clarification was required. Midway through the presentation, the younger Leclerc leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You speak with authority," he said, "but what gives you the insight into human error and recovery? Numbers can be modeled, but humans, emotions, loyalty, betrayal, are far less predictable." Clara paused, allowing the question to linger. She took a breath, choosing honesty over rehearsed rhetoric. "Because I have lived through both failure and recovery," she said softly but firmly. "I have navigated betrayal, financial collapse, and personal loss. I've rebuilt, not from theory, but from experience. This gives me insight that pure modeling cannot replicate." A brief silence filled the room as her words settled. The elder Leclerc studied her intently, expression inscrutable. Before nodding slowly. "Interesting," he murmured. "Experience often teaches more than education." Alexander's gaze met hers briefly, a subtle nod acknowledging the power of her statement. By the conclusion of the meeting, the Leclerc partners had asked detailed questions, challenged projections, and tested assumptions, yet Clara had held her ground, responding with clarity, composure, and an undeniable presence of authority. Outside the office, Alexander exhaled, his voice unusually soft. "You were remarkable. They will remember that presentation, not just the numbers, but the conviction, the authenticity." Clara allowed herself a momentary smile, relief mingling with pride. "It's not just for them. It's for me. To prove that I can rebuild something meaningful on my own terms." He studied her expression, eyes thoughtful. "And yet, rebuilding together remains a possibility. How do you reconcile that?" She looked out at the streets bustling below, considering her answer carefully. "I reconcile by acknowledging that some partnerships are both professional and personal. But my first responsibility is to the integrity of the venture. If we can succeed there, the rest will follow, or it won't. But it cannot dictate the foundation." The day continued with site visits, client consultations, and strategy meetings, each requiring her attention to detail, quick adaptation, and persuasive authority. By late afternoon, exhaustion had begun to weigh, though her mind remained alert, cataloging insights and refining the approach for eventual follow-ups. Alexander suggested a brief walk along the lakeshore before dinner, the air crisp, the water reflecting a kaleidoscope of colors from the setting sun. "I envy your composure," he said quietly as they strolled. "Even under pressure, you maintain focus, poise, and a clarity many lose in moments like these." Clara allowed herself a small laugh, the tension easing slightly. "Composure is a learned skill, Alexander. Pain and failure teach lessons that no classroom ever could." He glanced at her, a trace of admiration in his gaze. "And yet, your resilience is more than skill. It's character. That is rare, and invaluable." Her steps faltered for a fraction of a second, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his tone. "We are each shaped by our circumstances," she said softly. "And sometimes, the circumstances we endure are the very foundation of our strength." He nodded, silent for a moment, then shifted the conversation. "Tomorrow, we meet with the Voss Consortium. They are more traditional, skeptical, and fiercely protective of legacy. They will test every aspect of your methodology and your patience." Clara inhaled deeply, bracing herself. "I am prepared. I understand that trust, credibility, and presence are just as critical as any model or projection. We address both with rigor and honesty." They returned to the residence, the first evening in Geneva fading into twilight, lights from the city and lake blending into a mosaic of promise and challenge. Dinner was quiet, subdued by fatigue yet punctuated by strategic discussion. Alexander offered guidance, yet allowed her autonomy in decision-making, a balance that both respected her expertise and subtly strengthened their partnership. Later, in the sitting room, she reviewed client notes, strategies, and contingencies, her mind alive with scenarios, potential pitfalls, and solutions. Alexander entered quietly, observing her dedication. "You immerse yourself fully," he remarked. "It is admirable, but do not forget to rest. Even the strongest foundation can crumble without care." Clara looked up, meeting his gaze. "I've learned the hard way that endurance alone is insufficient. Strategy, insight, and reflection matter as much as action." He nodded, a rare softness in his expression. "And yet, it is rare to see someone balance all three so effectively. You remind me that recovery is possible, even after devastation." The words hung between them, heavy with implication, the convergence of professional respect, personal acknowledgement, and unspoken connection. Clara set her pen down, allowing herself a brief moment of quiet reflection, realizing that the days ahead would challenge her intellect, resilience, and perhaps even her heart in ways she had yet to comprehend. Tomorrow, the Voss Consortium would test her limits. Today, she had proven to herself, and to Alexander, that she was capable, formidable, and ready for the battles ahead, both in business and in life. And beneath it all, a quiet certainty whispered, no matter the trials, no matter the setbacks, she would navigate this labyrinth with intelligence, courage, and the strength of a woman who had rebuilt her world from ashes. The morning air in Geneva was sharp, carrying the faint aroma of freshly baked bread and the distant tang of the lake as Clara arrived at the Voss Consortium's headquarters. She adjusted the sleeve of her tailored blazer, inhaling slowly to steady her nerves. Today was not just another meeting, it was a trial by fire, and she knew that every detail, every nuance of her presentation, would be dissected and scrutinized. Alexander followed closely behind, his presence a silent reassurance. He did not speak much, but his confidence in her abilities was palpable, a shield against the storm of expectations awaiting inside. The receptionist led them into a grand conference room, polished wood gleaming under soft lighting. The Voss Consortium's partners were already seated, their expressions a careful mask of curiosity and caution. "Ms. Dalton," a sharp-voiced man greeted her, "we've heard of your work with Alexander Richter. Let's see if the reality matches the acclaim." Clara nodded, her smile calm yet resolute. "I appreciate the opportunity to present. I understand your time is valuable, so I'll be direct and thorough." She began, projecting confidence and clarity, outlining Eventuality Consulting's approach to mitigating catastrophic financial and operational risks. As she emphasized not only analytical strategies but also human factors, emotions, loyalty, errors in judgment, elements that pure models often overlooked. The partners interjected with pointed questions, their tones sharp, testing her resolve, probing for weaknesses in both method and character. Clara met each challenge with composure, weaving in examples from her own life, failure, loss, and recovery, as evidence of insight born from experience rather than mere theory. One partner leaned back, fingers steepled. "You've experienced personal collapse," he said, voice measured. "Yet you ask us to entrust you with our legacy. How can we be certain your judgment is not clouded by past grievances?" Clara paused, considering her response carefully. "It is precisely because I have experienced collapse that my judgment is tempered by realism, resilience, and foresight. Emotional clarity comes not from avoiding failure, but from enduring it and learning to navigate it with integrity." Another partner raised an eyebrow. "And yet, your association with Alexander Richter complicates perception. Are you acting independently, or as an extension of his interests?" She straightened, meeting their gaze evenly. "The venture is independent. Alexander's support is strategic and financial, not managerial. My methodology, client approach, and execution remain autonomous, though we share a collaborative alignment of objectives." The room grew quiet, the weight of her words sinking in. Alexander, standing slightly behind her, allowed the silence to persist, his eyes fixed on her with something resembling pride. The consortium's senior partner, a woman whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded her, spoke finally. "We will test that claim. You'll handle a simulated crisis scenario, live, with our team. It will challenge your ability to adapt, make decisions under pressure, and maintain composure." Clara's pulse quickened, but she held her expression steady. "Understood. I welcome the exercise." The scenario unfolded immediately, a simulated operational failure, compounded by financial mismanagement, reputational exposure, and internal conflict within their firm. Clara navigated each step with precision, issuing directives, assessing risks, and making decisions under time constraints that simulated real-world urgency. At one point, an unexpected twist was introduced, an apparent betrayal by a trusted advisor, designed to provoke emotional reaction and test ethical judgment. Clara's heart leapt, but she forced herself to pause, gather facts, and respond strategically. Her voice remained calm, clear, and authoritative. Pause all major transactions, she instructed. Assess the source of the deviation and secure client communications. We act on evidence, not assumption. Minutes stretched like hours, each decision critical, each movement scrutinized by the consortium. Finally, the scenario concluded. Clara presented her post-analysis, outlining decisions, rationale, outcomes, and lessons. She highlighted areas for resilience, mitigation, and the human element's role in potential failure and recovery. Silence followed, tense and expectant, as the consortium exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they nodded, expressions revealing a grudging respect. The senior partner leaned forward. Ms. Dalton, you have demonstrated not only competence, but clarity of thought and moral grounding. Many fail when faced with pressure, you excelled. Alexander stepped forward, his voice low but filled with quiet pride. I did not doubt her. But even I am impressed by her performance. Clara allowed herself a momentary exhale, her chest rising and falling with relief mingled with lingering adrenaline. The consortium requested follow-up discussions, interest in future engagements, and a formal proposal for potential retainer agreements. As they exited the building, Clara's hands trembled slightly, though not from fear. The intensity of the morning had pushed her to the edge of emotional and professional limits. Alexander noticed and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. You've handled yourself exceptionally. Even I did not anticipate the precision and resilience you displayed. She managed a tired smile, the corners of her eyes crinkling. It was more than I expected from myself. I thought the past would overshadow my decisions. But today, it didn't. He nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. Resilience is forged in fire, Clara. You have been tested, and you have emerged capable, authoritative, and remarkable. Her mind wandered briefly to the months she had endured, the collapse of her business, the betrayal by her former husband, the uncertainty of her financial and personal life. Each setback had left scars, yet each had refined her instincts, sharpened her judgment, and cultivated the resilience now displayed so visibly to both Alexander and the consortium. The walk back to the car was quieter, the weight of accomplishment settling alongside a lingering fatigue. You will sleep tonight, Alexander said, a gentle directive. Even the strongest minds require rest to remain sharp. Clara nodded, appreciative of the subtle care behind his words. I'll try. But even in sleep, I think the mind will continue to process today's challenges. He smiled faintly. Let it. That is how mastery is achieved, through reflection, repetition, and adaptation. Later, in her temporary Geneva suite, Clara reviewed notes from the day, cataloging every question, decision point, and emotional reaction, preparing for follow-up strategies and presentations. A message from Alexander appeared, brief and to the point. Exceptional performance today. Dinner tomorrow. Discuss opportunities. She allowed herself a momentary thrill at the message, but quickly returned to focus on professional priorities, aware that every interaction now carried dual significance, business and personal. By nightfall, the city lights reflected off the lake in a brilliant mosaic, shadows dancing over rooftops. Clara stood at the window, letting the cool breeze brush her face, absorbing the enormity of the day. Her life had been rebuilt from devastation, yes, but today proved it was not just about survival. It was about thriving under pressure, commanding respect, and asserting her rightful place in a world that once sought to undermine her. And beneath it all, a quiet recognition. The partnership with Alexander was no longer just an opportunity, it was a test of integrity, trust, and shared ambition. She allowed herself one final thought before bed: no matter the trials ahead, no matter the complexity of alliances, betrayals, or emotional entanglements, she had survived, and she had proven that. Resilience, intelligence, and unwavering moral compass could turn even the harshest crucible into a platform for remarkable achievement. Tomorrow, the Voss Consortium would be but a prelude. The real test, expanding eventuality consulting, navigating Alexander's world, and facing the intricacies of trust and personal connection, was only just beginning, and Clara was ready. The morning in Zurich carried a grey hush, the clouds hanging low over the city as Clara exited the sleek car Alexander had arranged. She clutched her portfolio tightly, though the leather strap of her bag had become nearly an extension of her hand after months of constant use. Today was not a day for presentations or analytical brilliance, it was a day for confrontation, reflection, and testing the fragile trust between past, present, and potential future. Alexander met her at the entrance of his residence, his posture composed, but the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes betraying the aftereffects of his recent health complications. Morning, he greeted softly, not the booming voice of the boardroom, but a gentler cadence, as if the world outside his windows could not touch him here. Morning, Clara replied, her voice steady, though her chest tightened slightly at the sight of him, reminded once again of how deeply their paths had intertwined. Inside, the apartment was quiet, save for the occasional hum of a distant city and the subtle ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Alexander gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, scanning the room and its understated elegance. I assume you've reviewed the preliminary plans, he said, his gaze settling on her, intense and unwavering. I have, she confirmed. And there are points of concern regarding client autonomy and strategic independence. My intention is to ensure that Eventuality Consulting remains true to its methodology while leveraging Reuter's resources effectively. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I expected no less. But this discussion is not solely about business today. Clara raised an eyebrow, the weight of his tone immediately alerting her instincts. I gathered as much. Shall we speak frankly, then? Yes, he said, settling into an armchair, fingers lightly drumming on the leather. Clara, I need to acknowledge something that has been shadowing my mind these past months. The risk you took in trusting me, in offering a path to collaboration, was greater than I initially realized. I underestimated the personal cost it might have carried. Her hands unclenched from the portfolio as she absorbed his words, the admission cutting through the carefully constructed layers of professional decorum. I understand the stakes, she replied cautiously. But trust, once earned, is rarely risked without reason. We've navigated complexities before, financial, operational, even personal. Why now would the cost weigh so heavily? He exhaled, a quiet, controlled release, as if preparing to reveal more than either of them had yet articulated. Because I am not merely offering partnership, he said, eyes meeting hers, piercing through layers of guarded thought. I am offering a chance at rebuilding, not just a venture, but the life you lost and the person you are capable of becoming beyond the ashes. Clara felt her throat tighten, a mix of anticipation and fear pooling inside her. She had imagined this conversation countless times, yet never with such clarity, such blunt honesty. I'm aware of the offer, she said carefully. But rebuilding a life is not a simple transaction. It requires commitment, judgment, and a willingness to confront pain and doubt directly. Precisely, he said, leaning forward. Which is why I need to know, are you willing to invest yourself fully, without hesitation or reservation? Professionally and personally? Her pulse quickened, the room suddenly charged with a tension that went beyond boardrooms or financial schematics. This was raw, unfiltered, and personal. Alexander, she whispered, I am willing, if the terms are honest and if the boundaries are respected. I cannot surrender my independence, but I can share ambition, vision, and trust where it is deserved. He nodded, a shadow of relief passing across his features. Good. I would not ask otherwise. I respect the integrity that brought you here, and I intend to preserve it. But there is another matter. Clara braced herself. Go on. The consortium, he said, voice darkening slightly. They are impressed, but wary. Your independence is simultaneously your greatest strength and their most concerning unknown. There will be pressure, political, financial, even emotional, to compromise your autonomy. I anticipated as much, she said, though the weight of it settled more heavily than she expected. I will not compromise. My methods, my decisions, and my judgment are non-negotiable. The moment we allow external influence to dictate direction, we risk everything. He studied her intently, the gaze both analytical and personal. I believe you, Clara. Yet belief is not protection. Resistance will be tested, loyalties observed, and motives questioned. This will strain not only our venture, but ourselves. You must be prepared for that. She inhaled slowly, the reality of his words crystallizing in her mind. Challenges lay ahead far beyond the immediate thrill of approval or accomplishment. This was a crucible, and her character would be tested at every turn, and personally, she asked softly. How will we navigate the intersection of partnership and connection? His expression softened, the intensity of business shifting into something more delicate. Carefully. With honesty. With boundaries acknowledged and respect maintained. But I will not deny that the bond we share, complex, unexpected, and undeniably profound, exists. It must be considered in every decision we make. Clara nodded, her mind racing through months of struggle, triumph, and the painful recognition that past relationships had failed not from lack of desire but from lack of understanding and integrity. I will not allow distraction to dictate strategy, she said firmly. But I will acknowledge its presence, as you suggest. We move forward with clarity, trust, and awareness. A faint smile crossed his lips. Exactly. And that is why I wanted this conversation before the consortium reconvenes next week. You must be prepared for scrutiny, negotiation, and the inevitable tests that lie ahead. Together, but not dependent, bound by respect and shared ambition. Clara felt a sense of alignment settle within her, a rare calm amidst the storm of anticipation. Then we proceed, cautiously but confidently. No compromises that undermine vision. No hesitation in the face of pressure. He extended his hand, a silent contract of both professional and personal acknowledgement. She took it, strength and determination passing in the firm grip. Later that evening, alone in her suite, Clara reviewed documents and notes, preparing strategies not only for the consortium but for potential internal challenges within eventuality consulting itself. Her phone vibrated with a message from Alexander. Remember, clarity is our greatest asset. Trust your instincts, as always, she smiled faintly, the words echoing in her mind. Trust her instincts. The mantra had carried her through collapse, betrayal, and doubt. Now, it would guide her through the next phase, a phase where the stakes were higher, the scrutiny sharper, and the personal implications deeper. Outside, the Zurich skyline shimmered with reflected lights, each window a potential story, each street a reminder of challenges yet faced. Clara gazed out, feeling the full weight of responsibility and the rare thrill of opportunity. For the first time in months, the fear of failure was tempered by the certainty of purpose. She had survived collapse, she had rebuilt her life and now faced the ultimate test, not merely of skill or intelligence, but of character, judgment, and the delicate negotiation between ambition and emotion. And she would not falter. She would prove, once and for all, that resilience, integrity, and insight were not only surviving qualities, they were the foundation of true influence and lasting success. And in the quiet of her suite, as night settled over the city, Clara Dalton allowed herself a single thought, daring in its simplicity. She was ready for everything that lay ahead. The first morning of Clara's final week in Zurich arrived crisp and luminous, the light spilling across the city in muted gold, casting long shadows that danced on the cobblestones below. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of Alexander's residence, feeling the quiet hum of anticipation in her chest. Today was not merely a meeting, it was the culmination of months of rebuilding, confronting past wounds, and stepping into the unknown with deliberate intention. Alexander joined her, coffee in hand, the quiet smile he offered carrying the comfort of familiarity, yet tinged with the vulnerability that only recent brushings with mortality could instill. Ready? He asked softly, though the question felt rhetorical. Clara inhaled deeply, the crisp Zurich air seeming to invigorate her resolve. I've never been more ready. Let's conclude what we started, for business and for clarity. The consortium waited, the tension in the boardroom palpable as members filed in. Clara and Alexander took their seats, the room exuding the faint scent of polished wood and muted power. The presentation began with strategic insights, financial forecasts, and client engagement plans, but Clara spoke with a precision and confidence that went beyond data. She wove the story of eventuality consulting, how it was born from resilience, insight, and unflinching integrity. Alexander watched her from the side, admiration and respect evident in his gaze. It was clear that even in his weakened state, he recognized the rare strength of character and intellect she brought to the table. As questions arose, Clara answered calmly, never faltering, demonstrating not only her expertise but her ability to navigate pressure without compromise. Each point she made reinforced the value of independence and collaboration, showing that autonomy need not conflict with strategic partnership. The room grew quiet as she concluded, the weight of her presence settling over the consortium. After a moment, Alexander leaned forward, voice steady but low. Clara Dalton has demonstrated the kind of foresight, judgment, and integrity that this venture requires. She will lead Eventuality Consulting, with RTOR as a minority investor and strategic partner. A wave of acknowledgement rippled through the room. Some nodded in approval, others whispered amongst themselves, but all recognized the inevitability of the decision. As the formalities concluded, Clara felt a mixture of relief, triumph, and profound exhaustion. Months of uncertainty, doubt, and risk had led to this moment, yet the journey had reshaped her entirely. Alexander met her gaze across the table, the briefest of smiles crossing his lips. "You did not merely survive," he said quietly, "you transformed adversity into advantage, not just for yourself but for everyone who will benefit from this venture." She nodded, feeling the sincerity of the statement resonate deep within her. "And I could not have done it without the challenges. Without loss, without being forced to confront the fragility of circumstance, I would not have discovered my true capacity." Later, in the quiet of her temporary residence, Clara allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She pulled her small vial of preserved blood from its pendant, holding it in the lamplight as it glowed with the familiar deep crimson hue. It was more than a symbol of unexpected fortune, it was a testament to resilience, clarity, and the unforeseen value hidden within life's trials. Her phone chimed, a message from Mia, settled on the apartment in Geneva. "I can't wait to show you. Thank you for believing in me, always." Clara smiled, the pride swelling in her chest. Both she and her daughter were rebuilding, not merely surviving, but crafting lives of purpose and agency. Alexander's voice rang softly through another message, "Looking forward to our time in Chicago. Let's build wisely, boldly, and with integrity." Clara paused, reflecting on the journey from that fateful donation center to this moment of renewal. Every setback, betrayal, and loss had been transformed into a lesson, a stepping stone, a catalyst for reinvention. She opened her notebook, writing deliberately at the top of a fresh page, Chapter 1, The Value Within. Below it, she wrote, "Resilience is discovered in the moments we feel most powerless. True worth is not defined by external validation, circumstance, or wealth, but by our capacity to rise, adapt, and persist." Clara leaned back, letting the words settle. The lessons of her journey were not merely personal, they were universal. Collapse was inevitable at times, but reinvention was always possible. She drafted a note to her followers and subscribers, determined to share the insights she had gleaned. "Life will test you. It will strip you of comfort, status, and certainty. But within each setback lies an opportunity to discover strengths you never knew existed. Trust your instincts, preserve your integrity, and approach every challenge as a chance to rebuild, not merely to recover, but to thrive." Her pen hovered as she added, "Subscribe to witness journeys of resilience, strategy, and transformation. Together, we learn that collapse is not the end, it is a foundation for remarkable beginnings." Even as the message sent a ripple through her growing network, Clara felt the full weight of personal transformation. Alexander's presence in her life had been unexpected, complicated, and emotionally charged, yet it had mirrored her own evolution, acknowledging vulnerability, embracing authenticity, and cultivating collaboration without compromise. She glanced at her phone once more. A message from Tim Blackwood, "Documents are finalized. Legal review complete. Everything is positioned for growth." The word growth resonated with her, both professionally and personally. She had emerged from uncertainty not merely restored, but elevated, with clarity of purpose, independence, and the rare ability to balance intellect and empathy. Later, as twilight descended over Zurich, Clara walked along the lakefront, the reflections of city lights dancing on the water like sparks of possibility. Every step reminded her that life's value was not measured by wealth or social stature, but by the courage to face adversity, the discernment to choose wisely, and the resilience to build anew. She stopped, inhaling deeply, allowing the crisp air to fill her lungs. The journey had demanded sacrifice, patience, and relentless introspection, yet it had yielded clarity she could never have imagined. In that quiet moment, she realized that success was not a destination, it was the conscious act of choosing authenticity, embracing risk with intelligence, and nurturing connections that honored both independence and trust. Clara knew the path ahead would present challenges, unexpected pressures, emotional complexity, and operational hurdles, but she was ready. Not because she was invincible, but because she had learned the irreplaceable value of her own instincts, courage, and resilience. Returning to her suite, she placed the vial of crimson blood back in its pendant. It glimmered softly, a reminder of the extraordinary potential hidden in ordinary circumstances and the transformative power of belief in oneself. She settled at her desk, drafting notes for future workshops, articles, and videos aimed at empowering others, those who had faced collapse, betrayal, or the sudden loss of certainty. Her final note on the page read, "Golden blood or not, what matters is the strength you cultivate, the clarity you maintain, and the courage to begin again, always." As Clara leaned back, the city lights of Zurich glowing through the window, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The story was no longer about what had been lost, or who had walked away. It was about what she had found: resilience, vision, and the unshakable conviction that life, no matter how fractured, could always be rebuilt with intention, integrity, and courage. She stood, looking at the skyline, and whispered softly to herself, "This is just the beginning." And with that, Clara Dalton, survivor, strategist, and architect of her own destiny, stepped forward into a future she would define, not by circumstance, but by choice, clarity, and an unwavering trust in her own instincts. Life's setbacks are not the end. True value lies in resilience, clarity, and courage to rebuild. Trust your instincts, maintain integrity, and recognize that collapse can be a foundation for extraordinary beginnings. If you found Clara's journey inspiring, subscribe to follow more stories of reinvention, strategy, and personal empowerment. Learn how to transform adversity into opportunity and rebuild your life on your own terms.